A scream tore through the storm. Two sisters ran from a monster into a forest cursed by something ancient. The dark's alive and hunting. Subscribe now, or you'll miss the terror closing in. Rain crashed down like a vengeful god's tears, thick and merciless, hammering the warped, moss-eaten roof of an ancient barn that sagged under the onslaught, its timbers groaning like a dying beast. Wind shrieked through the splintered boards, icy and wild, slicing through the darkness like a blade through flesh, carrying the faint scent of rot and wet earth. Ashka clutched her little sister, Lyra, tight, her arms a trembling fortress around the 10-year-old's shivering frame as thunder roared outside, shaking the ground with a fury that rattled their bones. They hadn't dared whisper a word in hours, not since their father's drunken, venomous screams tore through their crumbling house, the front door crashing open with a bang that still echoed in their skulls, a sound that marked the end of safety. They'd bolted across the muddy yard, rain stinging their faces like shards of glass, feet slipping as they pushed through a jagged, broken fence into this decaying barn. Now their fragile sanctuary among soggy hay, spiderwebs thick as veils, and the rusted husks of tools abandoned to time, their edges dulled by rust and neglect. Ashka's breath puffed out in frosty clouds, her drenched dress clinging to her like a cold, sodden shroud, heavy with mud and despair. Lyra, small and frail, pressed her face into Ashka's chest, her shivers rattling them both like a fragile chime caught in a gale, her small hands clutching Ashka's arms. "I'm scared," she whimpered, her voice a thin wisp, nearly swallowed by the storm's relentless howl, trembling with a fear that mirrored Ashka's own. "I know," Ashka whispered back, brushing dripping hair from Lyra's pale forehead with a trembling hand, her fingers numb from the cold, her heart aching with every shudder she felt. "But I won't let him touch you again. I swear it on everything I've got left, on Mama's memory." They'd heard his rage before, the crash of furniture splintering against walls, the sharp snap of leather belts cracking the air, the clatter of empty bottles rolling across the warped floorboards, a soundtrack to their misery. But tonight was a beast unchained, a fury unleashed with no leash to hold it back. Tonight, their father, a man they only called Eli, had returned with nothing left to lose, a walking storm of fury and ruin, a shadow of the man he might have once been. He'd vanished for 9 days this time, lost in a desperate spiral. Cards in smoky gambling dens where the air reeked of stale tobacco, dice tossed in shadowy backrooms lit by flickering lanterns, or maybe a brawl he was too drunk to win, his knuckles bruised and bloody from fights he couldn't remember. When he staggered home, it was on a stolen horse, its ribs jutting like a skeleton, its eyes dull and lifeless from exhaustion, its hooves caked with mud from a road no one else dared travel. His face was a ruin, lips split open and oozing, one eye swollen shut, a fresh bruise blooming purple across his jaw, a tooth missing from his snarl, his beard matted with sweat and grime. His stare burned with a madness Ashka couldn't name, something feral and unhinged that sent a shiver down her spine, a look that promised violence without reason. He stank of whiskey, sweat, and the sour rot of despair, a stench that clung to him like a second skin. The door crashed open, hinges screaming in protest, and their mother's last chipped teapot, a fragile relic of better days, flew at the wall, shattering into a cloud of dust and fragments that scattered across the floor. "It's gone," he'd bellowed, voice thick with a twisted, mad triumph, his words slurring into each other. "House, land, every damn thing. Gambled it all away." Ashka had stood there, frozen, her breath caught in her throat, Lyra clutching her skirt with tiny, trembling hands, her small body pressed against Ashka's leg. He'd rounded on them, veins bulging, spit flying from his cracked lips, his hands clenched into fists. "What are you staring at, you useless little rats? Out! Get out of my sight!" Lyra's sobs pierced the air like a knife, sharp and raw, but Ashka snatched her hand, and they ran, through the blinding rain, past the skeletal remains of the pig pen where weeds choked the rotting posts, into the barn where they'd once built forts from hay bales under a sky that didn't hate them, a sky that once held stars instead of storms. Now, they crouched, hearts hammering, ears straining for the squish of boots in the mud, the telltale sign he was coming, the sound of their doom drawing near. Was he already out there, lurking in the dark, his shadow stretching toward them? "I want Mama," Lyra murmured, her voice breaking into a sob, her small hands clutching Ashka's arm tighter, her nails digging in with a desperation that left faint marks. Ashka's throat tightened, tears burning behind her eyes, threatening to spill over and betray her calm. Their mother had died a year ago. Pneumonia, they said, but Ashka knew it was more. A heart crushed by Eli's fists, his shouts, his endless failures until it just stopped beating one quiet night, leaving them alone with him, a ghost fading into the shadows of their memory. "Me too," she whispered, pulling Lyra closer, her damp hair cold against Ashka's cheek, a bitter reminder of the warmth they'd lost. The storm didn't care. Rain pounded on, wind rattling the barn like it wanted to tear it apart, to expose them to the night's cruelty. Hunger gnawed at Ashka's stomach like a living thing, a sharp, twisting pain. She hadn't eaten since 5 days ago, just a stale crust snatched from the table before Eli drank the last of their corn away, trading their future for another bottle, another night of oblivion. Lyra's sunken cheeks and hollow eyes told the same tale, her small body wasting away, her skin pale as moonlight. They couldn't stay here. If he found them, his rage would be a hammer, smashing everything they had left, hope, breath, life itself. If he didn't, the cold would creep in, silent and deadly, wrapping them in its icy fingers until they were nothing but frozen shadows, lost to the wind. Ashka stood, pulling Lyra up with her legs shaky but resolute, her spine stiffening with a resolve she didn't know she had. "We're leaving," she said, voice low but forged with iron, a promise to herself as much as to Lyra. "Where?" Lyra asked, eyes huge and pleading, glistening with unshed tears, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "Somewhere he can't find us. But where we're safe in a night this black, this cruel, this endless." The rain had eased just enough as they slipped out, stepping into a world drowned in wet and shadow, the air thick with the smell of earth, decay, and something faintly metallic that Ashka couldn't place. Mud sucked at their torn shoes, turning every step into a battle against the ground itself, threatening to pull them down into its grip, to hold them for whatever hunted them. Shadows loomed, twisting into shapes, trees, maybe, or figures watching from the dark, their outlines flickering in the storm's faint, eerie light. Ashka gripped Lyra's hand tight, her knuckles white, her fingers aching, pushing forward through the biting wind and sinking earth, her breath fogging in the chill, her chest tight with every inhale. They passed the gnarled oak where Eli once swore he'd hang their scrappy little mutt, before he traded it for a jug and a laugh with his drinking buddies down at the tavern, his voice slurring as he bragged about the deal, his eyes glazed with liquor. They didn't look back, didn't dare. The past was a weight they couldn't carry. The woods swallowed them whole, trees creaking like old bones under the wind's weight, branches snagging their clothes, icy water dripping down their necks and spines, soaking them to the marrow, chilling their blood. Ashka's teeth chattered, her legs burned with every step, her muscles screaming for rest, but she clung to her mother's words, spoken in a softer time by the hearth. "The woods don't lie, child. Men do. What truth hid in these shadows? Or what danger was waiting to pounce, its jaws open wide?" Hours bled into the night, the storm stretching thin and cruel, a relentless enemy that wouldn't relent. They stumbled through thorns that scratched their arms raw, leaving trails of red, puddles that soaked their feet until they felt like blocks of ice. Lyra's small hand growing colder in hers, her grip weakening with every step, her breath shallow. Exhaustion dragged at them like chains, pulling at their bones, a weight that threatened to crush them, and they collapsed beneath a towering oak, its roots sprawling like a giant's clawing fingers, gnarled and ancient, twisted by time. Ashka's legs gave out, crumpling beneath her, and Lyra curled in her lap, a shivering knot of fear, her breath faint against Ashka's chest. "Ashka, what do we do now?" Lyra whispered, voice trembling, her eyes searching Ashka's face for hope, for anything to hold on to. "We survive," Ashka said, forcing the words out steady, even as her hands shook, her body screaming for rest, her mind racing with doubt. She had no answers, just a sparkle flickering in her chest, refusing to die, a flame she fed with every ounce of her strength. Then a rustle. Sharp. Too close. Not the wind. Not a fox. Ashka's blood turned to ice, her breath catching in her throat, her pulse spiking. She shoved Lyra behind her, whispering, "Stay still," her voice barely audible over the wind. Her eyes darted through the dark. Nothing but dripping leaves and swaying branches, the forest a wall of black that swallowed the world. But her skin prickled, hair standing on end like a warning, a primal instinct screaming at her. Another sound. A twig snapped, loud as a gunshot, echoing through the trees, bouncing off the trunks like a taunt. Something was out there, moving, deliberate. What or who was it? A voice slithered through the woods, low and thick with drink, dripping with malice. A sound that turned her stomach to knots. "Girls, you think you can run from me?" "Eli," Lyra gasped, a tiny sob escaping her lips, her hands clutching Ashka's arm tighter, her nails digging in with a desperation that drew faint beads of blood. Ashka grabbed her, dragging her back from the sound, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst, a drumbeat of terror. They stumbled through wet ferns, tripping over roots, the dark a maze with no end, swallowing them whole like a hungry beast, its jaws snapping at their heels. "I'll find you, you little rats," he roared, closer now, his voice cutting through the storm's growl like a blade, sharp and deadly, laced with a fury that promised pain. Ashka's pulse thundered in her ears, drowning out the wind, her vision narrowing to the next step, the next breath. No weapon, no light, just blind terror pushing her forward, her legs moving on instinct alone, fueled by a need to protect Lyra. They slid down a muddy slope, Ashka hitting the ground hard, air punched from her lungs in a sharp, pained gasp, her ribs aching, her hands sinking into the mire. Lyra clung to her, safe but shaking like a leaf in a gale, her small whimpers breaking Ashka's heart, tearing at her resolve. Behind them, branches snapped, his curses growing louder, angrier, more desperate. A hunter closing in, his breath ragged in the distance. "Run!" Ashka hissed, yanking Lyra up, her voice raw with panic, her throat burning as she forced the word out. He was gaining. Could they outrun him? Or was he too close, his hands already reaching through the dark? The woods thickened, trees crowding in, their jagged limbs clawing at their sleeves and hair, tearing at their clothes like greedy hands, leaving scratches on their skin that stung with every movement. Then a gap, a narrow trail, overgrown with vines and thorns, snaked through the forest like a hidden wound, barely visible in the dark, its edges blurred by shadows. Ashka didn't think. They bolted down it, feet slapping wet leaves, slipping on slick patches, thorns snagging their legs, his shouts fading into frustrated snarls, then an eerie, unnatural silence that felt heavier than the storm itself, a quiet that pressed against their ears. They ran until Ashka's legs buckled, until her breath came in ragged sobs, and her vision blurred with black spots dancing at the edges, threatening to pull her under into unconsciousness. In a small clearing, they dropped, gasping, the wind moaning through the trees like a mourner's wail, a sound that sent chills down Ashka's spine, raising the hairs on her neck. "I think we lost him," Ashka panted, chest burning, her voice barely above a whisper, her lungs screaming for air, her body trembling with exhaustion. Lyra nodded, her eyes wide and hollow, reflecting the faint moonlight that broke through the clouds, her face ghostly pale, her lips trembling. Silence pressed down, thick and heavy, almost suffocating, the kind of quiet that hides something waiting, something watching. "What now?" Lyra whispered, her voice trembling with exhaustion, her small body slumping against Ashka, her weight a comfort and a burden. Ashka looked up. The moon pierced the storm, silver light spilling down the trail ahead, illuminating it like a path to somewhere unknown, a faint shimmer that promised escape or peril. "We keep going," she said, voice sharpening with resolve, a fire igniting in her chest, burning away the fear. "Until we're free." But in the shadows, unseen eyes glinted, tracking their every move, their breath quiet and patient, a predator's patience that set her nerves on edge. Had they escaped, or stumbled into a deeper, darker trap, one they couldn't see? The sun clawed its way up, chasing the night's shadows into retreat, painting the forest in hues of amber and gold, a fragile beauty that mocked their exhaustion, their desperation. Raindrops shimmered on leaves like tiny lanterns, catching the light, their gleam a cruel tease against the hunger gnawing at them. Ashka blinked, her face tight with weariness, her grimy dress heavy and cold against her legs, dragging her down with every movement, the fabric stiff with mud and sweat, chafing her skin. Lyra stirred beside her, pale and frail, her cheeks sunken, her lips cracked and dry, but her eyes still held a flicker of trust that cut Ashka to the core, a silent plea for safety that weighed on her like a stone. "I dreamed Mama was here," she said softly, her voice a fragile thread, barely holding together, her small hand reaching for Ashka's. Ashka forced a smile, her lips dry and splitting, the effort aching, her throat raw. "Me too." A lie. Her sleep had been a restless tangle of footsteps, phantom hands reaching from the dark, and a low growl she couldn't place, a sound that lingered in her mind like a warning, a shadow that wouldn't fade. But Lyra didn't need the truth. Not now. Not when it could break her. They had to move. No food, no water, just the will to live burning in Ashka's chest, a stubborn flame refusing to die, fueled by love and defiance. She picked a direction, away from the past, away from him. And they walked, their torn shoes leaving faint trails in the mud, marks that could betray them to anyone following, a breadcrumb trail for a hunter. By noon, hunger was a knife twisting in their guts, a sharp, relentless pain that doubled Ashka over, and Lyra's steps faltered, weak and unsteady, her small frame swaying like a reed in the wind, her breath shallow and quick. Then smoke, a thin, lazy curl rising above the treetops, faint but deliberate, a sign of life that could mean salvation or doom. Someone was close, but friend or foe? Or something worse, something that didn't fit either? "Stay here," Ashka said, crouching low behind a fallen log, its bark slick with moss, its edges crumbling under her touch. "If you hear trouble, run back fast." Lyra grabbed her arm, eyes pleading, her fingers digging into Ashka's skin, leaving faint marks, her voice breaking with panic. "Don't leave me," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes, spilling over onto her pale cheeks. Ashka's heart twisted, a pang of guilt stabbing her, but she pried Lyra's hands off gently, her touch soft but firm, her eyes locking with Lyra's. "I'll be back, I promise." She crept toward the smoke, heart pounding like a war drum in her chest, each beat a thunderclap, her breath shallow and quick. Through the bushes she saw it, a rough camp, small but lived in, its edges marked by trampled grass and scattered twigs. A fire flickered, a pot steaming over it, the scent of something savory teasing her empty stomach, making it growl with need. A bough rested against a rock, its string taut and ready, a quiver of arrows beside it, their tips glinting faintly. Voices hummed, low and unfamiliar, then a sudden laugh, warm but chilling, like it didn't belong in this wild, forsaken place, a sound that sent a shiver down her spine. Ashka froze, her breath catching, her pulse racing so fast she felt dizzy. Apache? Eli's whiskey-soaked rants painted them as bloodthirsty shadows, scalpers who'd kill without a thought, their knives dripping red, their eyes cold with hate. But her mother had hushed those tales once, her voice soft and steady by the firelight. Don't trust a man's hate, Ashka. Look for yourself. See the truth with your own eyes. Fear gripped her, a cold hand squeezing her throat, her chest tight with doubt. But Lyra's hunger, a sharp, gnawing ache Ashka could feel in her own bones, shoved her forward, overriding the terror, pushing her past the edge of caution. She stepped out, hands raised high, palms open, her voice trembling but clear. We're not here to hurt anyone. My sister's just a kid. We need help. Was this a lifeline or a noose tightening around their necks, ready to snap shut? Two figures turned. A young woman, Zahara, swift and fierce, her eyes sharp as flint, her braids swinging like a rope as she moved with a predator's grace, and an older man, lean and scarred, his face unreadable, his hands steady as stone, resting near a knife at his belt, its hilt worn from use. "Where's the child?" he asked, voice deep and calm, cutting through the crackle of the fire like a blade through silence, his gaze piercing her like an arrow. "Lyra, it's safe. Come out." Ashka called, her voice trembling despite her effort to steady it, her throat dry as sand, her words scraping out. Lyra shuffled forward, timid but brave, her small feet dragging in the dirt, her head low, her hands twisting together. Zahara knelt, her movements fluid, her gaze softening as she met Lyra's eyes, a faint smile touching her lips. "What's your name, little one?" "Lyra," she whispered, barely audible, her voice shaking, her eyes darting to Ashka for reassurance. "I'm Zahara. You've got courage, more than most." Ashka's voice shook as she spoke, her words tumbling out in a rush, her hands still raised. "We haven't eaten. We've been running all night. Please." The man studied her, his eyes narrowing, piercing through her like he could see her soul, his silence stretching long and heavy, then nodded once, a slow, deliberate motion that felt like a judgment. "You eat, then we talk." They got stew. Hot, simple, a miracle in a wooden bowl, the warmth seeping into their hands, the scent of herbs and meat a cruel tease to their starving bodies. Lyra shoveled it down, her hands trembling with need, broth dripping down her chin, her eyes closing with relief, and Ashka's throat burned watching her, tears threatening to spill, her chest tight with a mix of gratitude and dread that churned inside her. A third figure slipped from the tent, tall and silent, his gaze piercing through her like a needle, his hands empty but tense, his stance wary. A fourth shadow lingered at the camp's edge, barely visible, hooded and still, a faint outline against the trees. Watching too? A fifth rustle came from the bushes, soft but deliberate, then gone, followed by a sixth, a faint scrape like metal on stone, echoing faintly. Were they safe or surrounded, prey in a web they couldn't see, its strands tightening with every breath? Days bled into nights in the Apache camp, each one stretching the tension tighter, a thread ready to snap under the weight of unseen eyes. Zahara fed them, taught them to weave grass into mats, to find water in hidden streams trickling through the rocks. her hands quick and sure as she showed them. Zev, her brother, showed Ashka how to grip a knife, how to move without sound, his scars a map of battles she couldn't imagine, his silence heavy with lessons, his eyes always scanning the horizon, always watching for something she couldn't name. Lyra laughed again, chasing kids with sticks through the camp, her voice a fragile melody that echoed off the trees, a sound Ashka clung to like a lifeline, a reminder of why she fought. But unease simmered beneath it all. Whispers hissed around the fires at night. Eyes lingered too long, sharp with suspicion or something darker, something that made Ashka's skin crawl. Some muttered in a tongue Ashka couldn't grasp, their tones jagged with doubt or warning, their glances darting to her and Lyra like they were intruders, outsiders who didn't belong. One dusk, she caught that fourth figure again, hooded, motionless, a glint of metal at its side catching the fading light, standing at the tree lean like a sentinel, its shape too tall, too thin, unnatural. She blinked, and it was gone, leaving only the rustle of leaves, a whisper of movement that didn't fit. Are we staying, or will they send us away? Ashka asked Zahara one night, voice hushed as the fire crackled, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts across the ground. Some fear what chases you, Zahara said, her gaze dark, her words heavy with meaning, her hand resting on a small pouch at her belt, its contents a mystery. Ashka's stomach knotted, a cold fist twisting inside her, dread pooling in her gut like ice water. Eli wouldn't let them go. He'd see them as his property, his to drag back to that hell of a house. Even if it wasn't his anymore, his pride a chain around their necks, a leash he'd never release. Then a rider came, rough, tobacco-stained, his coat patched and greasy, his boots caked with mud, a crumpled bounty notice in his pocket. 2 girls, owned by Thomas Hadley, reward promised in scrawled ink, the paper worn from handling. Zahara lied smoothly, her voice steady as stone, sent him packing with a glare that could cut through steel. But Ashka saw the forced shadow shift as he rode off, a faint rustle following him into the trees, joined by a second, softer sound. Footsteps, light and quick. A third sound followed, a low whistle, sharp and brief, then silence. Was it one of Eli's men, or something else entirely, something older, watching from the edges, its intent hidden? That night, a cry pierced the air beyond the camp. Not human, not animal, a sound that clawed at the spine, sharp and wrong, like a scream from a throat that shouldn't exist, a wail that echoed in the bones. The Apache tensed, hands on weapons, eyes scanning the dark, their movements quick and silent, their faces tight with something Ashka couldn't read. Fear, maybe, or recognition. What was that? Ashka whispered, her voice barely a breath, her heart racing, her hands clenching the edge of her blanket. Zev shook his head, his jaw tight, his hand gripping his spear until his knuckles whitened. Old spirits, maybe, or a sign. Something's awake, something that doesn't sleep. Sleep didn't come after that. Ashka lay awake, Lyra curled beside her, the echo of that cry haunting her ears, a shiver running through her that wouldn't stop, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. The next night, a shadow moved closer, too tall, too thin, slipping between the tents like smoke, leaving a single feather on the ground, black and glossy, its edges frayed, its tip sharp as a needle. Ashka picked it up, her fingers trembling, the feather cold to the touch. "What's this?" she asked Zahara, holding it out, her voice shaking. Zahara's eyes widened, then narrowed, her breath catching for a moment. "Crow feather. Bad luck. Someone's marking us, calling something." Ashka's blood ran cold. Marking them for what? And why did it feel like the forest itself was listening? The next dusk, a scrap of cloth appeared near their tent, torn, stained with something dark. Not quite blood, but close, its edges frayed like it had been ripped from something alive, something that had struggled. "What's this?" Ashka asked, holding it up, her voice trembling, her fingers brushing the rough fabric. Zahara's face paled, her breath catching, her hand hovering over it. A warning, or claim. Someone's close, too close. Ashka's gut twisted. Someone was playing a game, and there were the pieces, pawns on a board she couldn't see, its rules hidden in the dark. That night, a low hum drifted through the camp. Not wind, not voices, something older, deeper, vibrating in the ground, a sound that made the hairs on her arms stand up. The Apache froze, their eyes wide, their hands gripping weapons, their breath shallow. "What is it?" Ashka whispered, her skin crawling, her heart pounding in her chest. "The forest," Zev said, his voice low, his gaze distant, his hand tightening on his spear. "It's speaking, warning us, or calling something else." Ashka's heart pounded. What did it want? And why did it feel like it knew her name? Dawn broke with a jolt. Hoofbeats thundered, close and brutal, shaking the ground like an earthquake, a rhythm that promised violence. 3 men burst into the camp's edge, Eli leading them, his face a mask of rage and whiskey, his eyes bloodshot and wild, his breath a cloud of sour fumes as he swayed on his feet, his hands clenched into fists. "Ashka, get out here, girl," he roared, voice dripping with hate, spit flying from his cracked lips, his words slurring into a growl. The camp snapped alive. Warriors gripped spears, eyes cold as steel, their stances low and ready, their movements precise. Ashka stepped forward, Lyra trembling behind her, clutching her sleeve with both hands, her small body pressed close, her breath quick and shallow. "No," she said, voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest, a fire burning beneath it, a defiance she hadn't known she possessed. He laughed, a jagged, ugly sound that grated the air, his teeth yellow and jagged, his face twisting into a sneer. "Think these savages will stop me? You're mine, both of you." One man reached for a pistol, his hand shaking with nerves. Zev struck, spear flashing, the shot flying wild into the trees, snapping branches with a crack. Arrows sang through the air, swift and deadly. Fists landed with dull thuds, and Eli's men buckled, groaning in the dirt, blood seeping into the mud, staining it dark. He fled, spitting venom as he mounted his horse, nearly falling in his drunken haze, his hands fumbling with the reins. "This ain't over. You hear me?" he screamed, vanishing into the woods, his curses echoing back like a promise of doom, a vow carved in the air. The Apache didn't cheer, just nodded, respect glinting in their eyes like firelight on water, a silent acknowledgement of her stand. That night, they named Ashka Yokata, Iron Willow, the one who bends but never breaks, a name carved in her soul with a weight she could feel. Lyra slept, safe in her lap, her breathing soft, her small hand curled around Ashka's fingers, a fragile trust that anchored her. But smoke rose on the ridge, new lights, flickering, moving closer, a slow march through the trees, deliberate and ominous, a procession of shadows that didn't belong to Eli. Another hunt was coming, and it wasn't him this time. Who else wanted them, and why? Ashka trained harder. Knives, traps, shadows became her teachers, her hands learning their weight, her feet finding silence, her mind sharpening with every lesson. Zev pushed her, his silence a stern guide, his hands showing her how to strike fast, how to vanish into the brush like a ghost, his scars a testament to survival she couldn't fathom. Zahara taught her herbs for wounds, snares for rabbits, survival stitched into every lesson, her voice calm but edged with urgency, her eyes flicking to the woods too often. Lyra carved wooden birds with the kids, her laughter a fragile gift that warmed Ashka's heart even as it ached with worry, a sound that felt too precious for this place. Days stretched long, tension coiling tighter with every sunrise, a spring wound too tight, ready to snap. Whispers grew, Some wanted them gone, fearing blood would follow them like a curse. Their voices sharp around the fires, their eyes hard with judgment. One dusk, that fourth shadow appeared again. Closer now, standing at the treeline, a glint of metal at its side catching the fading light, its shape too tall, too thin, unnatural, its edges blurring like smoke. Ashka's breath caught, her pulse racing like a trapped bird, her hand tightening on the knife at her hip. Zev, someone's watching, she said, voice low, her eyes locked on the spot where it had been. He nodded, grim, his hand resting on his spear, his stance shifting slightly. Not Eli, someone else. They've been here before, long before you, before us. That night, hoofbeats echoed again. 5 men this time, no Eli, but his kind, armed with rifles, sneering, sure they'd win, their boots heavy in the dirt, their faces rough with greed. Ashka hid in the trees with Zev, breath shallow, her fingers tight around a borrowed bough, her palms sweaty despite the chill. A trap snapped. One fell, shrieking, into a pit of stakes, his screams cutting the air like a blade, blood pooling beneath him, dark and thick. Her arrow flew, piercing a thigh with a wet thud, the man crumpling with a curse, his rifle clattering to the ground. Zev disarmed another, swift as wind, his spear a blur of motion, precise and deadly. The rest broke, fleeing in shame, their curses swallowed by the woods, their rifles abandoned in the mud, glinting faintly in the moonlight. Ashka stared down at the pit, the man's blood seeping into the earth, his eyes wild with pain and disbelief. Just a girl? He spat, his face twisted, his voice hoarse. Not anymore, she said, her voice cold as the night, steady as stone, a truth she felt in her bones. They left them broken, alive but beaten, their weapons scattered like fallen leaves, a warning to others. Lyra ran to her, arms tight around her waist, her voice a whisper against Ashka's chest. You came back. Always, Ashka promised, stroking her hair, her heart steady but heavy, a weight settling in her chest. But the woods stayed restless. Something else was out there, and it wasn't finished with them, its presence a shadow she couldn't shake. Weeks crept by, the camp becoming a fragile home, a sanctuary carved from chaos, its edges fraying with every passing day. Ashka learned their tongue, halting words forming on her lips, their ways sinking into her bones like roots into soil, her hands growing calloused from work and weapons. Lyra sang Apache songs with the children, her smile brighter, her small hands steady as she whittled sticks into shapes. Birds, rabbits, a tiny horse with a chipped ear, her small creations a testament to her resilience. But the horizon smoked again, more torches, closer each night, a creeping threat that wouldn't fade, their light flickering like eyes in the dark, watching, waiting. One morning, Zev pulled her aside, his face hard, his eyes shadowed, his voice low and urgent. They're not stopping, he said, handing her a bough. It's with smooth and heavy, its weight a promise of survival or death. 10 men, armed heavy, coming tomorrow. Ashka's fists clenched, her nails digging into her palms until they bled, small drops staining the dirt. Then we fight. That night, a strange mark appeared scratched into a tree near their tent. A crooked X, fresh and deep, carved with something sharp, its edges jagged, its presence a violation. What's this? Ashka asked Zahara, her voice tight, her fingers brushing the rough bark, feeling a faint warmth she couldn't explain. Trouble, Zahara said, her eyes narrowing, her hand hovering over the mark like it burned her skin, her breath quickening. Old sign, bad sign. Something's claiming this place, claiming us. Sleep was a stranger after that. Ashka lay awake, the X glowing in her mind like a brand, a symbol she couldn't unsee. Lyra's soft breaths beside her the only anchor in the storm of her thoughts, her small body a reminder of why she couldn't give up. The next dusk, a scrap of cloth appeared near the X, torn, stained with something dark. Not quite blood, but close. Its edges frayed like it had been ripped from something alive, something that had fought and lost. "What's this?" Ashka asked, holding it up, her voice trembling, her fingers brushing the rough fabric, her stomach lurching at its dampness. Zahara's face paled, her breath catching, her hand reaching for it, then pulling back. A warning, or claim. Someone's close, too close, watching every move. Ashka's gut twisted. Someone was playing a game, and they were the pieces, pawns on a board she couldn't see, its rules hidden in the dark, its stakes higher than she could guess. That night, a low hum drifted through the camp. Not wind, not voices, something older, deeper, vibrating the ground, a sound that made the hairs on her arms stand up, a pulse that felt alive. The Apache froze, their eyes wide, their hands gripping weapons, their breath shallow, their faces tight with something that looked like dread. "What is it?" Ashko whispered, her skin crawling, her heart pounding in her chest, her hands clenching the blanket. "The forest," Zev said, his voice low, his gaze distant, his hand tightening on his spear until his knuckles whitened. "It's speaking, warning us, or calling something else, something that's been here longer than we have." Ashka's heart pounded. What did it want? And why did it feel like it knew her name? Like it had always known her? The next night, a child screamed, a boy, barely older than Lyra, pointing at the trees. Ashka ran out, knife in hand, her breath hitching as she saw it. A figure, cloaked and tall, standing just beyond the camp, holding a staff topped with a skull, its eyes hollow, its jaw gaping. It didn't move, didn't speak, just watched, its presence a weight that pressed against her chest. Then it was gone, vanishing into the dark, leaving a single bone on the ground. Human, old, carved with the X, its surface polished by time, its edges sharp. "What is this?" Ashka asked, picking it up, her voice trembling, her fingers cold against its smooth surface. Zev's face darkened, his eyes narrowing, his voice a growl. "A call. Something's waking up, something that's been waiting, something that doesn't forgive." That night, the hum returned, louder, joined by whispers, words she couldn't catch, voices overlapping, circling the camp like vultures, a chorus of the unseen. The Apache armed themselves, their faces grim, their movements quick and silent. Ashka stood guard, Lyra beside her, her bow ready, her hand steady despite the fear gnawing at her. Dawn broke bloody. 10 riders stormed in, no Eli, but his malice gleamed in their guns, hooves pounding the earth. The camp braced, traps snapped, arrows flew. Ashka's bow struck true, blood pooling as 2 fell screaming into stakes. Zev's spears broke their line, swift and deadly. Ashka snared the last man. "Tell him it's done," she said, voice steel. He limped off, terrified, when freed. That night, fires blazed, songs rose. Lyra slept in her lap, clutching a chipped bird. Ashka had forged something fierce from ashes, but the X mark haunted her, a dark, unsolved vow. Months passed, the camp a fragile home. Ashka grew strong, blade steady, steps sure, eyes sharp from training. Lyra laughed again, crafting wooden birds and a tiny Ashka, her voice a bright thread. But the woods hummed, rustles, odd shadows, a faint heartbeat in the earth. One dusk, a tall, thin figure loomed on a ridge, staff or rifle in hand, vanishing like smoke. "They're not done," Zev warned, spear tight, something older than Eli, undying. Next night, a new mark, 2/XS, pulsed alive. "They're claiming us," Zahara said, voice tense, something ancient's waking. Ashka shivered. What wanted them? Days later, a child found an old human bone near camp, carved with XS, sharp and polished. "What's this?" Ashka asked, voice trembling, a chill gripping her. "Ekal," Zev growled, "something unforgiving's waking, tied to this land." That night, a loud hum and whispers circled like vultures, the Apache arming silently as 4XS smoldered in the dirt. Dawn brought thick fog, swallowing the camp, footsteps echoing unseen. Shadows loomed, tall, thin, countless, a deep voice rasped. "Your hours, marked from the start." Ashka stood guard, Lyra close, bow steady despite her metallic fear, heart frozen. Whose start? Weeks later, the camp woke to silence. No birds, no wind, a stillness that pressed against the ears. A circle of bones surrounded them. Human, animal, carved with excess, laid out like a ritual, their edges stained with something dark and wet. "What is this?" Ashka asked, her voice shaking, her hands trembling as she touched one, its coldness seeping into her skin. Zev's voice was a whisper, his face pale. "A cage. Something's trapped us, something that's been here forever." That night, the whispers turned to chants, words she didn't know, a language that felt alive, crawling under her skin. The Apache fought shadows. Arrows flew, traps snapped, but the figures melted away, only to return, their numbers growing. One dawn, the cloaked man reappeared, alone, his staff raised, the skull atop it gleaming. "You can't run. The forest owns you," he said, his voice a chorus now, layered with the whispers. The camp fought. Ashka's arrow struck, but he didn't fall, his form flickering like a mirage. He vanished, leaving a single word carved into the earth. Yokata. Her name, her new name. That night, Lyra woke screaming, her hands clawing at her chest. "They're inside me," she sobbed, her eyes wild. Ashka held her, her heart breaking, her mind racing. Inside her how? Months passed, the marks multiplying, 5XS, 6, 7, etched everywhere, a web closing in. The hum became a roar, the whispers a scream, the shadows a legion. One night, the forest split. Trees fell, the ground cracked, revealing a pit, dark and endless, bones spilling from its edges, all carved with excess. A voice boomed, "Not human, not alive. You woke us." Ashka stood at the edge, Lyra beside her, her bow drawn, her heart a furnace of defiance. The camp fought. Fire, steel, blood, but the shadows poured forth, endless, marked with excess, their eyes hollow, their hands reaching. Then Ashka's arrow flew, piercing the cloaked man's chest. His form flickered, then shattered into ash, the skull staff clattering to the ground. A piercing wail erupted, the shadows freezing mid-reach, their excess glowing red-hot before crumbling into dust. Zahara and Zev struck the pit's edge with fire and spear, collapsing it in a thunderous crash, burying the bones beneath rubble and silence. Lyra clung to Ashka, her sobs softening as the hum faded, the forest stilling under a pale dawn. "It's over," Ashka whispered, her bow dropping, her hazel eyes tracing the horizon where light broke through. Freedom, fragile but theirs. They'd faced the dark and won. Yokata's iron will unbroken, Lyra safe in her arms.